On today's show, we're digging into the game of William Moore, a 2025 NHL draft eligible playmaking center with a whole bunch of growth potential.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we're going to be digging into the game of one of the players in my regions in the USHL, and that is a player from the U.S. National Team Development Program who came into the season with top 15 or even top 10 potential upside in many conversations heading into this season of potential rankings, but has found himself being more of a late first round to early second round range talent in most people's views that are out in the public at this moment. We'll see what happens on draft day, but he's likely going to be available towards the end of the first round. So we'll be digging into his profile and his high-end tools in the first segment. In the second one, we're going to talk a bit about the overall toolkit, how the physicality bleeds into his game, both in terms of the hurdles he has at the moment in terms of overcoming the physical lackings in close quarters and board battles especially, while also giving him a lot of growth potential and potential to evolve into a very different style of player than we see on the ice at the moment, because the skill and the intelligence are both really high-end traits with this player. So a very interesting combination of things, and a player with significant upside, even though he is not a slam dunk NHL certain kind of player. He still has similar upside that many people saw in him coming into this season when he was, again, a top 10, top 15 conversation player. And we'll also be digging into his habits there in the second segment. Then in the third, we're going to wrap up the show talking a little bit about his projection and the predictions, looking ahead towards the NHL draft, where he might fall, which NHL teams would be good fits, as well as overall what his NHL upside would be in theory, his NHL floor, and which NHL players share certain elements with his game. So a lot to look forward to on today's show, and let's just dig into it here into the first segment, kicking it off with just his profile. Who is this player? William Moore is a 6'2", 174-pound left shot centerman. He's a March 24th, 07 birthday, so born around the middle in terms of the draft class. The cutoff there is always September 15th. And this season for the U.S. National Team Development Program, he's dressed in 51 games, scored 22 goals, 22 assists for 44 points. In the USHL specifically, he's played in 21 games and scored 9 goals, 9 assists for 18 points. So across the board, just under a point a game player, while also being perfectly balanced in goals and assists. And that shot, that intelligence that drives a goal scoring, I think are very projectable elements in his game and exciting tools that he offers. But the playmaking might offer him the most room to grow in his game, especially when combined with more filled out physical frame and an overall ability to resist contact and initiate contact and play through contact rather than having to go around it. So a lot of things that can still evolve in this player's game. And he came into the season with still a lot of junior level habits, especially in terms of the motor and engagement, as we'll dig into the next segment. But overall, this season, I think he's been one of the best players on that USNTDP team. And that's also shown in terms of that production this season. He's been among the top producers on this team all season long, being outproduced only by Jack Murtagh, who has a point more in 7 less games, as well as Cole McKinney, who has 7 more points in 4 less games. Also to note, LJ Mooney has 32 points in 38 games. He missed a chunk of time after a super ugly knee-on-knee collision against an NCAA opponent. But overall, Will Moore has been one of the more involved offensive players, and that's been the case both offensively at even strength, but also on the power play, as we'll be digging into in this episode. But overall, I think a player with a lot of room to grow, but also just some fantastic skill elements that underlie his game. game, and that's what we'll be digging into here in this first segment. So let's start things off with the shot with this player, because it is a really, really good weapon. It's hard, it's accurate. He's able to get it off with little time or space to work with, but the struggle there is getting shot off through contact after bouncing off another player. That's where things become more difficult. As soon as contact is initiated, things start to fall apart a little bit in Wilmore's game at this point. There really just isn't that physical resistance and overall physical frame and strength to resist contact, even against USHL opponents and U18 opponents internationally. What's more impactful even than the actual quality and the mechanics of the shot with Wilmore, however, are the habits underlying it. He's a very intelligent player, and that's something that I'm sure is going to be resonating throughout this entire episode, is that intelligence. He's a very cerebral player. He's constantly scanning the ice. He's falling into supportive positions, always angled well with his gap control. He's always sticking in little pockets where he can be impactful. And often his teammates, I found this season, haven't really been able to squeeze the most out of that intelligent off puck movement with Wilmore, because he's just constantly available in interesting areas in the offensive zone. And that's also true in transition. And that's another element in this game that's a real strength, and that's his skating, his mobility, his fluidity on his feet. He's so comfortable on the ice. The explosiveness certainly lacks, and this is something that he will need to work on in terms of adding that lower body weight to just explode from a standstill, because that's certainly not an area of strength. But his top speed is quite good. But that fluidity and his comfort of layering his feet with his hands, he's a very, very fluid player when he gets going towards his higher speeds. He's so deceptive and manipulative, can pull defenders one way and then it just bounce the other. And he's just a very opportunistic and evasive and intelligent player in that regard. So the skating, I think, will especially evolve into an area of strength, one that explosiveness is able to catch up a little bit with the rest of the skating mechanics. But the handling is equally just very, very nice to watch on the ice. He's a very comfortable puck handler, and he's been a high-end puck handler going back to like his 15 and 14-year-old seasons playing in the Toronto area. But he's been talked about in prospect circles for quite a few seasons now for good reason, and it's been as a result of these high-end tools that, when meshed together, can result in some wonderful offensive sequences. But what I found this season is that he's most impactful while making more projectable kind of plays. So quick give and go passes, keeping his feet moving, supporting pass and move, pass and move, pass and move, rather than trying to dangle around a single opponent and finding that perfect primary assist every single game. He's been a bit more pragmatic as the years gone on. He's matured in those habits. He's become much more like a cog in the wheel of that NTDP team, rather than a star trying to find his place in that lineup, like seemed to be the case earlier on the season. So things have certainly been falling into place for this player as the years gone on, and the results with the NTDP have certainly mirrored that. They have been really quite good in the past 2 months, and winning a lot more games. They're finding form. They're staying healthy. Fingers crossed that can continue for the rest of the season. But overall, I think Wilmore has really shown with these puck skills in his game, and the best among these, or at least the best projection in the NHL among these, in my view, is the passing game. His intelligence shines the brightest here. Even though his off puck movement as a goal scorer is really good at the NHL level, just very good off puck movement isn't going to buy you all that many goals. I think that Wilmore projects more as a 20 goal scorer than a 30 goal scorer in the NHL if he really hits his gears as a high end NHL center. But I think that he has maybe like 40 assist upside, and in that range, if he can really, really make it inside a top six in a good lineup with dynamic supporting wingers who can match his intelligence off the rush and make those quick split second decisions to support each other, and can build that chemistry. And we've seen this season how much better Will Moore looks in an environment where he has established chemistry, like later on in this campaign than early on, when there's still a lot more improvisation in his offensive sequences, trusting his line mates less, not really being able to predict what they're going to do, and then certainly not being able to predict what he's going to do because he sees plays that few other players on the ice see at that level. But overall, I think that the passing game has that really high end potential of being like a playmaking driver on a second line in the NHL if he hits. And there's still a big if on that, and we're going to dig into that mostly in the next segment. But overall, the passing game is just creative, it's precise, it's quick when it's on. And I've seen some sequences of him dragging the puck around one defender, hooking behind their skates, and then passing through like two more sticks on the way to landing right on the tape for a teammate in a perfect shooting position in the hip pocket. Like, there are some brilliant sequences with this player that I've just loved to watch this season. But in the next segment, we're going to talk a little bit more of the drawbacks and the question marks in his game while digging into his toolkit and his habits and talking a bit more about the physicality and how that bleeds into the rest of his game, but also the room for upside that gives in terms of development over the coming seasons. But we'll dig into that after these messages from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee. But I got tired of my grocery store brands that just weren't cutting it anymore. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, this coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the US, bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match just for you. I took their quick quiz, and in just under a minute, they matched me with a roast that was fresh, smelled incredible, and tasted even better. And if you don't love your bag, no worries. Trade will replace it for free until they get it just right. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first order. All right, let's keep things going in the second segment here, delving into the habits and the toolkit here for William Moore of the U.S. National Team Development Program. And these are aspects that I think are very interesting, not just for how he plays the game, but for how he's going to project to the National Hockey League level. And the physicality is the aspect that bleeds into everything else, and is both the source of a lot of question marks, but also of potential growth down the road. These aren't just bad question marks. These are question marks that could definitely raise his stock in the coming years. And this is down to his physicality being very underdeveloped at this stage compared to most players in this draft class. Despite being 6'2" and 174 pounds, which might be a generous listing because he looks more lanky than that on the ice, and resisting physical contact has been a difficult thing for this player this season. He spent this year relying on his intelligence and, more than anything, evading contact, avoiding it in general. And when he does initiate, he often just gets completely overpowered in physical confrontations, even with players who are 3, 4, 5 inches shorter than him, but have better leverage mechanics. He's still a bit wonky on his feet in terms of balance and resisting that kind of contact and retaining balance throughout. So a player who still is going to have to build up a bunch of strength in his lower body and his upper body too. He's going to have to learn to resist pressure along the boards and in open ice, and perhaps even seek out some contact in the middle of the ice down the road if he's really able to add 30, 35 pounds in the coming seasons. Because in terms of the flashes, we have seen this player be able to initiate contact against weaker opponents. This is less of a desire thing and more of a ability thing at this stage. But he's just so often taken out of the play when he does get involved physically. And when he's an F1 on the forecheck, he can just really be tossed aside easily. But he has good stick habits. He has very good anticipation. And these things have really helped him compensate for these lackings this season. But what makes him interesting in terms of an NHL projection is that the way he will play in the NHL if he hits his upside is going to look very different from how he's playing the game of hockey now. It's going to be a lot more inside driven, a lot more within contact, because he doesn't have the level of skating to just evade everything at the professional level like he is at the moment. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how these physical habits and these physical abilities will end up bleeding into the rest of his game, because you're also going to see the offensive abilities be able to really improve significantly if he can add that weight after being drafted. And I think whoever drafts him will also play a big role in making sure he gets that kind of physical training to just build up that weight in the coming years. But going over to Boston College is already a very good start there in the NCAA next season. But overall, I think this is a player with some excellent raw tools. We talked about this in the first segment: the shot, the passing ability, the handling, the mobility, even lacking some explosiveness, certainly. But in terms of just pure technical ability, these are all above average tools. And this season, the expectation had been for him to just dominate the NTDP and be the go-to guy. And he's lacked the dynamism and he's lacked the physicality to really take over games and take over shifts this season, but has constantly been making a difference with his intelligent roots, with his intelligent habits overall. Quick stick work defensively. He's always in a good position to support his teammates on both sides of the ice. He's a player I think has a lot of growth potential as well in terms of how his intelligent transition routes will keep influencing the game when he does have that physicality to blow past the player, and to not only have the physicality to go through opponents, but to also have the explosiveness to just burst by people. And I think that these elements are things that will grow in his game. We've already seen these things get better over the course of this season, but there's still a lot of room to grow. So Will Moore, to me, is a player that is going to need quite a couple seasons to develop at the college level. I'd give him at least 3 seasons probably, because the intelligence is so good. But again, these physical things need a long way to go until they're ready to resist the NHL pace, the NHL level. And I think that anticipation is really the basis of what allows him to compensate for these lackings at this stage in his development. He's always in a supportive position. He has really good gap management. He's constantly making defenders guess by placing himself between 2 checks, and just making uncomfortable decisions, consistently forcing them from defenders on the opposing team. And he's a player I think will be able to make an impact in the offensive zone, whether he's playing in a bottom 6 or top 6 at the end of the day in the NHL. He has so many of these small details to support his teammates and cause some chaos and confusion down low in the offensive zone. So in transition, these supportive habits are seen like being consistently right below the puck, constantly close to the puck carrier, consistently an outlet option. And as soon as he gets that outlet pass, he just passes it right along. So passes kind of bounce off of him, which make him a really interesting give and go player, I think, at the next level, because he can make those quick, accurate one-touch passes and doesn't need a lot of time on puck at all to know what the best play is, and often already knows what the play is he wants to do before the puck even touches his stick. So I think a player who thinks the game at an NHL projectable level and more than that, but again, the physicality still has a long way to go. In the defensive zone, it's all positioning and active stick work that makes him impactful, but the limitations in intensity, that stamina, I still think needs work as well. That limitation in explosiveness also allows dynamic forwards to just get around him in the offensive zone. And once a player's around him, he can struggle to catch back up to play at times. So a player that I think definitely has some strengths in every area of the game, but also his weaknesses that bleed in to all these various areas as well, and especially regarding physicality, intensity, stamina. So while Will Moore is a player with significant potential at the NHL level, especially regarding his intelligence in the offensive zone and the upside in transition of just quick give and go plays, and his skating should also take another boost once he can add some strength to his lower body and get that quick 1-2 step acceleration. That there's a lot of upside that can be seen in different areas of the game for this player too, but At the same time, still many question marks and a decently long runway that he'll need to go down before he's ready for the NHL. So a player that I think is very interesting. And I hope you listeners who have not yet watched this player perhaps have a sense of both the conflicting desires to have him higher up boards, but also lower down, because the upside is high, but it's very theoretical projection. We don't even know what that's going to look like, what style of player he's truly going to be at the next level, apart from his intelligence, anticipation, and quick give and go playing being core to his projection at the next level. And again, that physicality, intensity, stamina need a bunch of work, but that wraps things up here for the second segment. In the final one, we're going to wrap up the show by looking ahead in this player's projection at where he might go in the 2025 NHL draft, what his overall NHL upside might be, his NHL floor as well, and which NHL players remind me of how he plays the game. All that and a bunch more in the final segment. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. I've been in that spot where you need the right hire like yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs come right in handy. They make sure that your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to indeed.com/lockedon to get started and support our show by saying that you heard all about Indeed on our podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, you need Indeed. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment with the projection and our predictions for William Moore of the U.S. National Team Development Program, a player with a lot of playmaking potential, very intelligent, but a lot of physical lackings. So where he falls on draft day, I think, remains a bit up in the air, but the range I feel most comfortable with is in the first round, but at the tail end. So perhaps between 24th and 32nd overall. You're getting a lot of contending teams selecting in there, as well as teams who are most certainly not contending, but acquired first round draft selections and are picking for their second or even third time in the draft late there in the first. He's a B plus prospect in my book. He's been towards the top end of my second round or the lower end of my first all year round, pretty much. I mean, the first couple of months he was kind of in that top 20 range, going back to September, October, but ever since the season's begun this year, he's very much been in that 25 to 35 range on my board. And over at Elite Prospects, our most recent ranking back in March, we ranked him over at 30th overall. He was there with a string of USHLers at the bottom of the first round, including guys like Jack Murtagh and Benjamin Kivon, as well as Vaclav Nestrasil of the Muskegon Lumberjacks. And I think among those, Will Moore kind of stands out as definitely the most creative and intelligence center in the USHL in this year's draft class, ahead of Ivan Ryabkin for me personally, quite clearly in terms of, I think, the overall runway, where Ryabkin is quite physically developed. He's built out his frame. He's like 5'11", over 200 pounds, and just kind of chases hits rather than making the small physical plays to create space in the offensive zone or to do more proactive plays that keep him in the frame of play rather than out of it. Whereas Will Moore, of course, still has to build all that physicality, doesn't have that foundation yet, but that gives him runway in terms of filling out his frame and evolving how he approaches the game, as well as learning how to then use his frame, because he's going to be in that process anyways already. So I think he's a player with a decent amount of upside and a first round, but bottom end of the first round talent in my eyes. And in terms of NHL projection, he's an interesting one because the upside is very interesting. I think there's second line potential with this player, with just how intelligent he is, with how good the tools are. And we've seen him be a high end player going back to his D-2, D-3 seasons, and really catching the eyes of NHL scouts as a 15 and 16-year-old playing in the GTHL. But ever since moving now over to the US and playing in the NTDP. I think that he's maybe taken a bit of a back seat in terms of being a really high-end prospect in this year's draft class, but the elements that gave him that projection remain. The high-end playmaking, the creativity, being able to hang on the pucks through pressure. He's a really impressive puck handler in certain sequences. All these things can come together for some really wonderful offensive plays. So I think the upside is definitely here with this player, but the floor is also relatively low, because if that physicality never quite takes that next step, he might end up as an AHL scorer at his best. And that risk is why he's not a slam dunk first round talent, and why he fell out of that like top 20 range that he found himself earlier on in the season, because so much of projecting him to the NHL is so hinging on things that aren't in his game yet that we hope are going to be built over the coming seasons. But if they're not, a lot of these hopes for NHL stardom, or at least big NHL impact, they end up breaking down a little bit. So for NHL GMs, I can definitely understand the hesitation that might be there in taking a swing on a player like Will Moore, but especially for teams that are picking with their second or third picks of the draft. And I think for that, we looked further down in the first round. I think teams like Nashville, who acquired that Vegas first round pick, could be quite interested in a player like Will Moore with a decent amount of upside, who will be available later on in that range. Or even the Chicago Blackhawks, if they want to go with another centerman and want to add a little bit more playmaking creativity in their middle six projection longer term. I think that pick they acquired from the Toronto Maple Leafs, 24th overall projected right now on Tankathon, could also be an interesting destination for him. But more than anything, I think an interesting landing spot for this player would be the Philadelphia Flyers, a team in need of centermen. I mean, of course, they traded away Scott Laughton just at the deadline to the Toronto Maple Leafs, but overall lack center depth in both their NHL team and their prospect pool. And they have multiple first-round picks this year, 3 to be exact. They acquired those from the Colorado Avalanche and the Edmonton Oilers, which are assumed to be around the 20 to 26 range at the moment. In that range, I think Will Moore would make a lot of sense and would bring a lot of potential as well down the middle for a team that already went out and got Jet Luchenko at 14th overall last year at the draft. And this year, I think they're going to be doubling down the middle yet again. So look for Philadelphia to take a flyer on William Moore potentially in the late first round this season. But what NHL players play a little bit like Will Moore? I mean, I think there's a lot of players that can come to mind in terms of having playmaking upside, being quite cerebral, but still perhaps having some elements in their games that took some time to iron out, even once they did make the NHL. So one player that would come to mind in terms of perhaps the ultimate upside with a guy like Will Moore would be a guy like Dylan Strome of the Washington Capitals, a guy who really took time to catch his stride, didn't really end up sticking with the Arizona Coyotes after being drafted 3rd overall in that McDavid draft in 2015. Ended up being traded to the Chicago Blackhawks, really started finding his footing there in a second line capacity, and now has just become a true first line center in the NHL with the Capitals. But in terms of that creativity, the intelligence, and just how his playmaking is a both connective tool but also progressive tool to build play up the ice to get it into the offensive zone with control. I think there's a lot of elements of how the playmaking functions and how the intelligence layers into that playmaking ability that reminds me of Dylan Strome in William Moore's game. But in terms of perhaps lower upside comparisons, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, in terms of that intelligence, in terms of that lanky frame still needing to be grown into after being drafted, I think there are some similarities there. And with Kotkaniemi, I think his offensive potential was very much stagnated by making that jump to the NHL immediately after being picked by the Habs at 3rd overall. But Will Moore, I think, will really be needing that time in college hockey to refine and develop. But in terms of having some really decent playmaking chops, but also being able to grow into a plus level defensive piece with how he thinks the game, I think that Kotkaniemi has some aspects that remind me of William Moore. Perhaps if Moore ends up being a 3rd line guy, Kotkaniemi is a more apt comparison in that sense. But I'd be very curious to hear from you down below in the comments. Which players remind you the most of Will Moore? Are there any comps here that I completely missed? I'd be very curious to hear from you down below. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, apart from just leaving me those comments down below, please do make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always really appreciate our everydayers here on the show. And for your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself the most sustainable and competitive fantasy roster. But that wraps things up here for us today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian Nye, and I look forward to catching you tuning in again very, very soon.